Hi, everyone. Welcome to season 2, episode 15 of Social Anxiety Life. And in today's episode, we're going to discuss social anxiety in the classroom.
We're going to share insights from a recent Instagram poll, classroom strategies from educators, and really importantly, we're going to share with you how to spot the signs of social anxiety in the classroom.
So, social anxiety in the classroom, I think it probably has a misconception, in fact, several misconceptions. And would you say, before we go into what it might look like, is it something that's quite difficult to spot, would you say?
I think so. I think there's probably a misconception that social anxiety in your classroom will be quite an obvious thing. For example, maybe tears or sort of behaviour that exhibits unhappiness. But actually, I think some of the signs can be much more subtle than that.
I think social anxiety is something that's hidden, it's quiet, it's if you didn't know the signs of it, then you may very well miss it. And it's something that, quite sadly, I think people get told to get on with it, or they get told to, just push forward with it, when actually that's probably not the best way at all. So, thinking about children that we may have taught or children in the classroom, how would you recognise it? What things would you look for?
Well, we've sort of come up with a checklist. Now, this doesn't necessarily cover everything, but we think these cover some of the signs that you might look out for. So, things like avoiding eye contact, withdrawing from group tasks or social play, a child that maybe speaks really quietly, or a child that maybe doesn't speak at all, struggling with presentations and class discussions. I mean, that's one I can identify with.
Oh my goodness, yeah, we've talked a lot
Yeah.
in the past about struggling with that.
Yeah. A child that appears invisible or maybe fades into the background, a child that asks to leave the room or take a break often, a child that takes a long time to settle in the morning, signs of being overwhelmed by transitions during the day or noisy spaces, a child that avoids putting their hand up even when they know the answer, or a child that's extremely distressed about being seen or picked out.
As you were going through the list there of possible traits of social anxiety, some of those straight away link to other things. They're not just social anxiety traits, they're other neurodivergent traits. And I think it's important to acknowledge that social anxiety on its own is not a single issue. And I think it overlaps with other things. So it could overlap with autism, it could overlap with ADHD, being selective or elective mute, or it could be a trauma response. And probably what makes it stand out more is that social judgment. It's that fear of, if you're a child in the classroom, just imagine you're a child, you come into the classroom first thing in the morning, even separating from your adult is difficult, because you're then going from the security of your adult to a classroom where, quite frankly, it could be overwhelming in terms of lots of children, multiple adults in the room, not knowing what to do. And that's a really difficult thing to really sort of get to understand. I think it's very much pulling apart what it is that child needs at the time.
Yeah, and I think when you look through all those potential signs of social anxiety, you sort of realize some of those signs are very visible, ones like, being upset in the morning or being dysregulated. But then some of them are really subtle, things like avoiding eye contact, or asking to leave the room, or asking to go to the toilet or have a break. Those things might not be things that we would necessarily pick up on as a potential sign of social anxiety.
Do you recognise any of those signs in yourself when you were younger?
Absolutely, yeah. Especially ones around public speaking, presentations. That was always something I massively struggled with. The one about speaking quietly. I was always told every school report it would be, oh, she's very quiet. I'd like her to put her hand up more. She doesn't really put her hand up. She doesn't contribute to discussions in class. And that was, I think, looking back, a lot of that was my social anxiety.
I agree. You know, the eye contact, avoiding eye contact, speaking quietly, struggle with presentations, taking time to settle, overwhelmed by not the classroom itself, by probably the number of other children within the classroom. But I think we know better now. Like if we were to rewind and go back to our younger selves, you know, if the adults that we'd worked with had put things in place
Yeah.
to ensure that we could participate in ways other than verbal, we may have done better.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also important to point out we're not saying that these are definite signs of social anxiety. Your child might exhibit one of these signs. That doesn't necessarily mean they have social anxiety, but these may be useful signs to look out for.
Now, building on that, we ran an Instagram poll asking educators, do you have children in your class with social anxiety? Now, most teachers said yes to that. And building on from that is, what's the biggest challenge you see in those learners? And breaking those results down, 32% said it was interacting with others, 29% said school refusal. So that's an interesting one, the school refusal one, because increasingly now we see children who can't even come to school because of their set of circumstances. But one of those things could be their anxiety around others. 21% said speaking in class and 18% said others, which included transitions, change, unstructured time, and other things.
Yeah, I think as an educator, 21% said speaking in class. That's probably something we would notice very quickly. We're very aware as educators of the children that like to contribute in class discussions and the children that don't. But that's an interesting one, 32% interactions with others. And that's something we observe throughout the day, isn't it? As we see the way that children interact with other children, and you can learn a lot from observing children's interactions with their peers.
Building on from that, we had some contributions from educators, and one person contacted us via Instagram at Supporting Young Minds, and I know that this person won't mind, but this person does incredible work with children, and this person says that they should be offered a voice and a place to feel heard in their own time. Some children will speak when they feel safe, not when we ask. I find that one very pertinent. There's a lot in that that's neuroaffirming in terms of you're acknowledging how they feel, but that point about being safe. Now, safe, that for me means being safe in interacting with other people rather than feeling safe, physically feeling safe. I think the classroom itself builds on to the role of the adult. And if you have social anxiety, you want your routine for when you come in to the classroom. So do they always have to come to the carpet? Do they always have to do this particular thing? Well, actually, that soft start mantra, that sort of soft start, right? We come in, we can have some time to ourselves in a particular area. Then when it's learning time, we can then come and join. But then if we don't feel ready, then what do we do?
Yeah, and I think that's important. Children will speak when they feel safe, not when we ask. You think about when you do a register with the children and there's this expectation that you say good morning to me. Well, some children can't do that. Some children aren't ready for that. Some children, if they have social anxiety or, are on the spectrum, that's not something we should expect of them. And we have to make adaptations for those children.
And interestingly, building on from that, there was an anonymous contributor who wrote about non-verbal communication and using visuals, which is exactly what you've just said about if they're not going to say, if they choose not to say good morning, if they don't want to say good morning, how else can we ask them to communicate? So thumbs up, smile, wave, whatever, or a little, a little visual, a little sign to say that they're there. That then brings up that sort of phrase, this is how we've always done it. That example you gave about, we should always say good morning verbally, when actually it's not always the preferred way. Is it something that we should be worried about? If a child's not saying good morning, well, quite honestly, I've got other things to.
Yeah.
There's other things to be concerned about, and I think allowing the child to express themselves in their preferred style is absolutely key.
Yeah. Kate shared, validate their feelings, encourage journaling and affirmations. I mean, I assume the sort of journaling affirmations would be for older children, possibly than we are working with. But yeah, validation is huge. Acknowledging, I see that was hard for you, or I understand that this is difficult, kind of validating the fact that you recognize that is a struggle for that child, but that it's okay.
It sounds quite small, but it's very powerful saying to a child, I can see that you're upset, or can you tell me how you're feeling? If they can't, pointing, if you use things like zones of regulation, or use emotional literacy, so pointing to how they're feeling, and then what do we do about it? Crying and being upset is the body's way of regulating itself. It's its body's way of trying to manage those big feelings.
Yeah.
And the child will only benefit from our help and expertise rather than dismissing it.
Yeah, absolutely.
There is another contribution we've had from O'Malley Huff on Instagram that really stood out for me. It's saying that we must establish ourselves as safe people or a safe person, helping them to co-regulate and taking small steps for social things. I think it's important to acknowledge that if a child is neurodivergent, if they have anything such as autism or ADHD or dyspraxia, dyslexia or ODD, we should ensure that those children we don't tell those children to adhere to like the neurotypical form. We acknowledge their style of doing things. So verbally saying good morning is neurotypical, probably, in the fact that that's their way of doing things. Neurodivergent children can also say good morning, but also there's other ways of doing it as well. And it's really coming together how we do things, because they will feed off what we do.
Yeah.
If we're not making a song and dance about a child's upset in the morning and doing what we know works, which is calmness, listening, validating, then the hope is that child will then trust us and it will build connection.
Yeah. And actually just thinking about, there's so much pressure throughout the school day for children to speak and contribute. You think about, I mentioned register, but children are in talk partners. Talk to your talk partner. That's an expectation. I'm going to choose a lollipop stick with a name on it, and if I choose your name, you have to answer my question. There's so much that goes on throughout the day where children are expected to speak confidently. And I don't think within education there's enough recognition of the fact that not all children are ready for that. And actually we do have to make adaptations for those children. And we can't just have a blanket sort of everyone needs to do this, everyone needs to talk in talk partners, because there's reasons why some children might not be doing that.
Yeah, it's about adaptive teaching.
Yeah.
So if a child, I would find talk partners extremely triggering. If I had to talk to my partner on the carpet, I need to know how to do it. I want a safety net. So if I don't feel like contributing, or I don't want to contribute, can I show it in a different way? So can I draw my answer on the whiteboard? Can I do it in a different way?
Yeah.
I think those challenges that we spoke about earlier, the interacting with others, for me, triggers that fear of being judged, embarrassed, or rejected, which leads to overthinking. It's not being critical of other people, it's about feeling unsafe.
Yeah.
And that reaction, that stress response through crying or, you know, hiding under a table or grabbing onto our caregiver, they're not doing it to be difficult. They're doing it because they don't feel safe or they don't know what to do. I think that's the shift from that sort of attitude, like, oh, come in and get on with it,
Yeah.
to right, these are the things that will help you feel safer or feel in control of your own feelings.
Yeah, absolutely. If we're looking at school refusal, that can be really a school-based anxiety, and it's like a survival response. It's not the child is being difficult, the child is being defiant. The child may really want to come in and learn, but there's that barrier there. And I think we've probably both experienced that, having children that don't want to come into the classroom, children that get very upset in the mornings or very unsettled, and it's about how are we supporting that, because it can be quite difficult. You want all of the children to come in happily and calmly, and that doesn't always happen, and it can be quite a difficult thing to balance.
Well, it's like those phrases, I've been guilty of saying it in the past, like use your words.
Yeah.
Actually, some children don't want to use their words, or they can't use their words because they're overtaken by the feeling of anxiety or upsetness or sadness or whatever it is. So it's a shift away from those traditional practices to being more neuroaffirming. I think speaking in class is tough. We've already said, even saying like you're here in the register is too much, and providing those non-verbal ways of doing it, it will make the child happier.
Yeah. So we need to really shift our expectations, giving children choices, celebrating small steps, validation, and above all, I think we both agree with this, offering safety before anything else, giving them a safe space.
And we would love to keep this conversation going. So on Spotify, there's a poll open, which is, what's the biggest challenge you've seen in socially anxious children? And there'll be some options there for you to click on and a space for you to add your own answer.
Yeah. And we've talked in this episode about recognizing social anxiety. So if you would like a copy of our Recognizing Social Anxiety checklist, you can email us at socialanxietylive2023@gmail.com, and we will happily send that through.
Thank you so much for listening today. Every anxious child deserves an educator that really gets it. And being a part of this audience listening to this episode, that's you, definitely you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you soon.
Bye-bye.